right, I'm going to wrap up the European theater with 1945. So the race to Germany, we talked a little bit about. We also talked a little bit about the Cold War beginning to take shape in 1945. A couple of the other things that happened as the Allied forces and the Soviets were racing towards Germany was that this became a time period of total war. Um, the concept total war is sort of a World War II concept, even though there was some of it in World War One. And total war simply means that everything is a target if it holds some strategy and you potentially winning. So what this means is that all gloves are off. There are no rules to war anymore by 1945. Civilians, hospitals, whatever, become targets potentially if they advance your cause. So this is kind of the most cynical and brutal time in World War II, where, obviously in the Pacific theater, we're annihilating whole cities. But in the European theater, similar type of thing is sort of taking shape. Dresden is a German city that the United States firebombed and killed something like 50,000 men, women, children, anybody who was living in Dresden. And this is a pretty good example of total war. I'll talk about it again when we get into the Pacific theater, but with the bombings in World War II, the United States and the Allies were responsible for 4 of the 5 mass bombings that killed over 50,000 civilians, Dresden being one of them. In Dresden, books have been written about it, and fiction and nonfiction and whatnot. But essentially what they did was they just dropped these incendiary bombs in carpet bombing runs and burned the whole city. So that was sort of a new thing in warfare. I guess the calculation was at this point that, the Nazis were bombing London earlier in the war, and they were firing V-2 rockets into the city. And so anything kind of went at this point. The next thing that happened in 1945 was that the concentration camps were discovered by the Allies and by the Soviets when they were kind of coming into Germany. So the deeper they got into German-held territory is when they eventually discovered the concentration camps. And the concentration camps had been rumored, right? So people sort of knew that the Nazis were holding the Jews and the Roma and prisoners of war and communists and whatnot. And the Nazis had filmed sort of propaganda films of what these camps looked like, and they distributed them. And there was definitely whispers that there was these mass extermination camps going on, but it wasn't until 45 that the Americans and the Soviets actually found the proof that these terrible concentration camps actually existed. And part of it is that if something has never happened before, it's hard for you to imagine it. And the concentration camps were kind of a new thing. They were something that had never happened before. And when they stumbled upon them as they were going into Germany, they realized that they were onto something that was horrific and new and had never been seen before. Concentration camps really are, they're factories of death. They took a lot of the elements of the Industrial Revolution and combined it with, scientific techniques on how to, exterminate people really quickly and incinerate the bodies and whatnot. So it was kind of the brutal culmination of the Industrial Revolution in the process of actually killing your victims. The thing that, and I'm sure there are many things that are really disturbing about the concentration camps, but one of the things that's really disturbing is just how cold and calculating it was in regards to the actual sanctity of human life and whatnot. And certainly we can go on forever and ever with examples, but when the Allies and the Soviets alike discovered these concentration camps. It was a shock to their systems. It was something that was obviously repulsive, and um, and it showed, I think, finally, what Hitler's fascist regime actually stood for in terms of like internal policies in countries. So uh, we'll discuss it later, but it was uh, it was a startling discovery. In April of 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president of the United States, who had been president for 3+ terms, and Hitler, who had obviously been the chancellor of Germany since 1934, both died. Obviously, Roosevelt died of natural causes. He kind of hung on in that very difficult position for probably too long, simply because the United States had grown to, sort of rely on him as the president. And, having somebody reliable probably was more comforting to most Americans than going through the democratic process and voting somebody new into office in the midst of a war. And Hitler died of suicide in his bunker, burned to death, or his remains were burned. And, there were many rumors for many years that it was a setup and he continued to live on. But, it seems that Hitler and FDR both died in April of 1945. And so that was pretty much the end of the European theater. And then the fate of post-war Europe had to be decided at conferences like Potsdam, in Tehran, and some of the other big conferences where Stalin and Churchill and originally FDR, but then Truman sat down and tried to decide how they were going to settle in, dispose of, the territory that they had gained, not dispose of, but split up the territory they had gained from Germany. And so this is where the complexities of the Cold War start to begin. From day one of the post-war fate being decided, Churchill and the Americans didn't trust Stalin, and I don't think Stalin trusted Churchill and the Americans. So they got off to a bad start right from the very beginning. Okay.